The feds are moving in, they got him now. The murder of Christopher Wallace, better known as the notorious B.I.G. or Biggie Smalls, remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in hip-hop history. Nearly 3 decades later, people continue examining the smallest details from the night of March 8th into the early morning of March 9th, 1997. One detail that continues to generate questions is the fact that Sean Puff Daddy Combs was traveling in a different vehicle from Biggie when the shooting happened. On its own, that does not prove anything suspicious. Large celebrity entourages commonly travel in several vehicles, especially when artists, executives, security personnel, and friends are moving together. There is also no established evidence proving that Combs deliberately refused to ride with Biggie because he knew an attack was coming. But when you examine how the vehicles moved, how they became separated, and how quickly the gunman appeared beside Biggie's SUV, it is understandable why investigators, journalists, and hip-hop fans have spent years asking exactly what happened during those final minutes. Biggie was in Los Angeles surrounding the Soul Train Music Awards weekend. On the night before his murder, he attended a major party at the Peterson Automotive Museum. The event attracted celebrities, musicians, producers, executives, and other entertainment industry figures. Published accounts have placed people including Faith Evans, Aaliyah, Queen Latifah, Chris Tucker, Jermaine Dupri, Da Brat, Missy Elliott, Timbaland, and members of Biggie's Bad Boy Circle around the festivities that night. The party eventually became overcrowded, and authorities shut it down. That forced hundreds of people to begin leaving around the same time, creating a chaotic environment outside the museum. Biggie and members of the Bad Boy entourage prepared to leave in multiple vehicles. This is where one of the most discussed details enters the story. Biggie and Puff Daddy did not get into the same SUV. Biggie entered a green Chevrolet/G MC Suburban and sat in the front passenger seat. Traveling with him were his friend Damian D-Rock Butler Jr., MAFIA, rapper James Lil Cease, Lloyd, and driver Gregory G Money Young. Puff Daddy was traveling separately in another SUV with members of his entourage and security operation. Accounts of the convoy have identified people associated with Puff's vehicle as including Eugene Gene Deal, Anthony Tone Jacobs, Stevie J, and driver Kenny Story. Another security vehicle was also associated with the group. Immediately, people looking back at the murder asked the obvious question: why wasn't Puff riding with Biggie? These were two of the most recognizable figures associated with Bad Boy Records. Puff had played an enormous role in Biggie's career, and they were attending the same event and leaving for the same general destination. But this is where we have to be extremely careful. There is no established evidence showing that Biggie asked Puff to ride with him and Puff mysteriously refused. There is no proven evidence that Puff selected another vehicle because he expected something to happen. Multiple vehicles were necessary because there were simply too many people in the entourage to fit inside one SUV. What makes the situation interesting isn't necessarily that they were riding separately. It is what happened after those vehicles started moving. The convoy left the area surrounding the Peterson Automotive Museum and began traveling through Los Angeles. At some point, the vehicles became separated by traffic. Puff's vehicle reportedly moved ahead while Biggie's Suburban was stopped at the intersection of Wilshire Boulevard and South Fairfax Avenue. Suddenly, Biggie was no longer simply traveling inside a moving convoy surrounded by the entire entourage. His SUV was sitting at a traffic light. That small separation would become one of the most consequential moments in hip-hop history. A dark Chevrolet Impala pulled alongside the passenger side of Biggie's Suburban. The position is extremely important because Biggie was sitting in the front passenger seat. Witness accounts describe the shooter as a black man dressed in formal clothing, including a suit and bow tie. Within seconds, the attacker opened fire into the vehicle. Biggie was struck multiple times. Everything happened incredibly fast. The shooter didn't attack Biggie inside the packed party. He didn't confront him while Biggie was walking through hundreds of people. He didn't attempt to chase the convoy down the highway. The shooting occurred when Biggie's vehicle was stopped and vulnerable enough for another automobile to pull directly alongside it. Biggie was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where doctors attempted to save him. Christopher Wallace was pronounced dead at approximately 1:15 a.m. on March 9, 1997. He was only 24 years old. That sequence creates questions that remain powerful even without accusing anyone of participating in the murder. How did the shooter identify Biggie's particular SUV? Did the shooter already know which vehicle Biggie entered? Was somebody watching the group as they left the museum? Did someone follow the convoy? Was information passed to the shooter? Or did the killer simply recognize Biggie's vehicle and wait for an opportunity? Then there is another question. How did the attacker know which side of the SUV to approach? Biggie was sitting on the passenger side. The killer's vehicle came alongside that side. That could have resulted from observation rather than inside information, but investigators naturally had to consider how much the attacker knew about Biggie's movements. And that brings Puff's separate SUV back into the discussion. Puff was ahead of Biggie when the shooting happened. If Biggie had been inside Puff's vehicle, the circumstances would obviously have been completely different. If the convoy had remained together, perhaps the shooter would have had a harder time getting into position. But those are hypothetical possibilities. They cannot establish guilt or foreknowledge. The traffic light could simply have created a devastating coincidence. Yet when a murder remains unsolved for this long, every coincidence receives another look. One of the people who has spoken publicly about that night is Eugene "Gene" Deal, who worked in security around Puff Daddy. Deal has given interviews over the years discussing Biggie's final night and his recollections of what happened before and after the shooting. His statements have contributed to public debate surrounding the case. But recollections, interviews, and personal theories should be distinguished from conclusions established by investigators or proven in court. That distinction matters because Biggie's murder has produced countless theories. Some theories have focused on Los Angeles gang members. Others have suggested retaliation connected to the murder of Tupac Shakur 6 months earlier. Other theories have focused on Death Row Records associates. Some investigations examine allegations involving corrupt law enforcement officers. Still, other people have developed theories involving individuals within the music business. But after decades of speculation, nobody has been convicted of murdering Christopher Wallace. Federal investigators eventually examined aspects of Biggie's murder as well. FBI records released publicly show that the Bureau investigated the case for years before the federal investigation was closed in 2005. Those records are important because they demonstrate just how seriously investigators examined allegations surrounding the killing. But the existence of an FBI investigation does not mean every allegation appearing in an investigative file was proven. Investigators collect witness statements, rumors, theories, leads, and contradictory information while attempting to determine what actually happened. The same standard has to apply when discussing Puff Daddy. Being in another SUV is not evidence that Puff knew Biggie was going to be killed. Traveling ahead of Biggie's vehicle is not evidence that Puff arranged the separation. Surviving while Biggie died does not establish involvement, but those facts can still be examined as part of reconstructing the crime. The stronger investigative question is not simply, why wasn't Puff inside Biggie's vehicle? The stronger question is, who knew where Biggie was? Think about the environment outside the Peterson Automotive Museum. Hundreds of people were leaving. Cars were everywhere. Celebrities were moving through the area. Security personnel were attempting to control the entourage. Biggie entered one particular SUV and took one particular seat. Not long afterward, a vehicle managed to get alongside that exact SUV, and shots were fired toward the side where Biggie was sitting. Was somebody watching him from the moment he walked outside? Did someone see him enter the Suburban? Did the killer follow the convoy? Was the attack organized earlier in the evening? Those questions become even more significant because Biggie wasn't alone inside that SUV. D-Rock and Lil Cease were traveling with him, and Gregory G. Money Young was driving. They survived. The gunfire was directed toward the passenger area where Biggie was sitting. The attack therefore didn't look like someone randomly firing at a collection of bad boy vehicles. Biggie was the person who was killed, and the timing is chilling. Imagine the final sequence. The party shuts down. Biggie walks outside. The entourage organizes itself. People divide among several SUVs. Puff enters one vehicle. Biggie enters another. Security follows. The convoy pulls away. Traffic begins separating the vehicles. Puff's SUV gets farther ahead. Biggie's Suburban reaches the intersection and stops. Then another car appears. Within seconds, one of the biggest rappers in the world has been shot. The killer escapes. Biggie is rushed to the hospital, and the murder remains officially unresolved decades later. That is why the question surrounding the different vehicles continues to attract attention. It isn't because riding separately proves Puff Daddy was involved. It doesn't. The significance comes from the incredible chain of events that occurred immediately afterward. If the shooting was planned, someone had to locate Biggie. Someone had to know which vehicle to approach. Someone had to get close enough to fire. And somebody ultimately pulled that trigger. Whether the shooter had inside information is another question entirely. There is no publicly established evidence proving that someone inside Biggie's entourage provided his location. The killer could have watched Biggie leave the party or followed the vehicles, but investigators would naturally want to determine who knew Biggie's movements, who knew his destination, and who could identify his vehicle. That is where Biggie's murder becomes much larger than one suspicious-looking moment. You have the East Coast-West Coast rivalry hanging over hip-hop at the time. Tupac Shakur had been murdered in Las Vegas only 6 months earlier. Biggie and Tupac had gone from friends to being portrayed publicly as bitter rivals. Bad Boy Records and Death Row Records had become symbols of a conflict that was increasingly dangerous. Tupac's murder was itself unresolved at the time. Then Biggie traveled to California and was murdered. It was almost inevitable that people would connect the two killings. But theories are not convictions. Even after years of police investigations, federal inquiries, lawsuits, documentaries, interviews, and books, Biggie's killer has not been convicted. That means the responsible way to examine this mystery is to keep asking questions while separating those questions from accusations. Why did the killer appear at exactly that moment? How was Biggie's vehicle identified? Was the shooter already waiting nearby? Did the attacker follow the convoy? Who knew where Biggie was headed? Who knew which SUV contained Biggie? Who knew where he was sitting? Why was the security arrangement unable to prevent another vehicle from getting alongside him? And was the separation between Puff's SUV and Biggie's SUV simply terrible luck? Those are questions worth examining, but there is one question we cannot responsibly answer without evidence. Whether Puff Daddy intentionally stayed out of Biggie's vehicle because he knew Biggie was going to be attacked. There is no established evidence proving that claim. In fact, focusing only on Puff risks overlooking the much larger mystery. Somebody killed Christopher Wallace. That person apparently found him in the middle of Los Angeles after an enormous celebrity party, maneuvered alongside his SUV at precisely the right moment, opened fire, and escaped. The killer wasn't convicted. Whoever planned or carried out the attack managed to leave behind one of the longest-running mysteries in American music history. Maybe the answer lies in the people outside the Peterson Automotive Museum. Maybe it lies in the movements of the convoy. Maybe it lies in the gang conflicts investigators later examined. Maybe it lies in information investigators collected but could never prove. Or maybe one overlooked witness saw something that night that could completely change our understanding of what happened. What we know is that Biggie Smalls entered one SUV while Puff Daddy traveled in another. Biggie's vehicle became separated from the vehicle ahead of it. Biggie's Suburban stopped at an intersection. Another vehicle pulled alongside. A gunman fired into the passenger side. Biggie was rushed to the hospital and died. Those are the facts around which the mystery continues to revolve. And after all these years, perhaps the biggest question isn't why Puff Daddy wasn't sitting beside Biggie. The biggest question is this: how did the killer know exactly where Christopher Wallace was when the opportunity to murder him appeared? Until investigators can conclusively answer who pulled the trigger and whether anyone else helped arrange the attack, the final ride of Biggie Smalls will continue to generate questions. There were witnesses, there were security personnel, there were multiple vehicles, there was a crowded celebrity party, There were investigators, there were years of interviews and thousands of pages of theories. Yet Christopher Wallace's murder still has no murder conviction. And that is what makes those final minutes so haunting. We know where Biggie was sitting. We know many of the people traveling around him. We know where the shooting happened. We know another vehicle approached him. We know shots were fired. We know Biggie died. What we still don't definitively know is the answer to the questions that matter most. Who wanted Biggie Smalls dead? Who carried out the murder? And how did the killer know exactly where to find him that night?